a lot of people complain that I don't warn them that the videos have spoilers, so guys, how are you? I hope you are well. I am the Monio, the interdimensional demon that talks the most about Kaiju Number 8 on YouTube, and you are on my channel. Guys, I explain a lot of things in this video, so to avoid any doubts, watch until the end to understand everything, okay? At the end of the first episode, we see this flying kaiju that I will call the Mosquito Kaiju, and he says to Kafka, "I found you," and the impression is that Kafka was chosen, and that this was not a random selection. This kaiju seemed was looking for a perfect host, and for some reason, Kafka fit the requirements that this kaiju was looking for, and the fact that Kafka was chosen is a little ironic, as he doesn't seem to have any characteristics that make him special. He is a guy who is over 30, clearly not in his prime, and not very strong compared to other characters. An interesting thing in this scene is that we see some lines coming out of the Mosquito Kaiju's head, suggesting that he is using some type of telepathy, or communicated in some way that only Kafka could hear. And we can see that only Kafka hears this message, since his friend Reno was in the next bed and didn't hear anything. And this suggests that Kafka was already biologically special even before fusing with the Mosquito Kaiju. But how is that possible? Well, to understand this, first we will need to analyze some things about kaijus and Kafka. An important thing to consider, as a rule, kaijus do not speak, and do not have the ability to communicate with humans. Of course there are exceptions, such as Kaiju Number 9. But apart from exceptions, kaijus do not communicate with beings humans. This is because most of them exhibit irrational behavior, similar to animals, and are driven by instinct, and not by reasoning itself. And this shows that this kaiju who spoke to Kafka is one of these exceptions. Another interesting characteristic of this Mosquito Kaiju is that it does not appear to be hostile towards humans, but towards other kaijus. And proof of this is what happened during Kafka's fight against Isao Shinomiya, in which Kafka had to transform into the Kaiju Number 8, or you would end up dying, since Isao is very strong, and was using weapon number 2. In explaining quickly, the numbered weapons are special suits, which are made from the bodies of the numbered kaijus, which are the strongest class, and Isao was using the weapon that was made from the body of Kaiju Number 2, and during this fight, Kafka loses control of his own body, because the kaiju inside him reacted to the powerful aura of Kaiju Number 2, Kafka's body no longer obeyed his will, and the kaiju took control, becoming extremely aggressive, and at that moment he didn't seem to see that he was fighting a human using a numbered weapon, but against Kaiju Number 2, and the way the kaiju inside Kafka was fighting, it seemed like he wanted to kill Kaiju Number 2, not Isao, and he was repeating the phrase "kill kaiju." This shows that the objective of the Mosquito Kaiju is actually to exterminate the other kaijus, probably being a kind of living weapon that was created, or was born for this purpose. And this is quite possible, even more so if we take into account that the only other kaiju known, who is not hostile towards humans and who attacks other kaijus, is Bako, Mina's pet tiger. Yes, he is not a real tiger. He is a kaiju who fights alongside Mino to protect her, but this one is the original objective, since according to Kaiju Number 9, Bako is a defective kaiju, which is something very rare. Keeping in mind that the Mosquito Kaiju's goal is to exterminate all other kaiju, it obviously needs to be as powerful as possible when it bonds with its host, which was one of the reasons it chose Kafka. But the Monio, I didn't understand, if he needed to be as powerful as possible, why did he choose a weak guy? Kafka's friend was next door, why wasn't he chosen? Why didn't he choose Kokoro for example? In fact, the fact that Kafka is extremely weak was precisely one of the reasons he was chosen by the Kaiju Mosquito.
You didn't have to cut me off. I could never know we were nothing. I don't even need your love, but you treat me like a stranger, and I feel so loved.
Calm down, I'll explain. Kafka already naturally has combat power well below the average of a normal human being, even more so if you compare him with members of the defense force. But to use 100% of the power of a living kaiju, the host needs to be extremely weak to that his kaiju side can maximize all its power, which made Kafka a perfect host. And this is a concept that we have already seen in other animes such as My Hero Academia, in the protagonist who had no powers, and that is why he becomes the strongest, since, for a container to be completely filled, it needs to be empty. But the Monio, if the requirement was just to be weak, couldn't anyone be chosen? Any ordinary person who lived in that world? Not really. In the test scene with the clothes that the defense force wears, we learn that Kafka was the only one with 0% power, and Vice Captain Hashina says that even though people with low power had already taken the test, no one ever got 0%. This shows that Kafka really was special in this sense. But the Monio, if he needs to be weak to be powerful, why can members of the defense force, like Mino, be so powerful while being strong? Because it works differently in their case. The members of defense force use a suit made with kaiju cells, but these kaijus are no longer alive, so their combat power depends entirely on the human side to activate and use the potential of the suit. However, even a user like Mina, who reaches 96%, or even a user who reaches 100% of the suit's use, is not using the kaiju's real potential. This only happens when the kaiju is alive, as is the case with Kafka. Furthermore, a human cannot use its full percentage all the time. There is a time limit in which he can use the suit to its fullest. For example, Mino can only use his 96% power for a few minutes, and if she exceeding the time limit, the suit overheats and can cause serious damage to your body. But the Monio, what would happen if someone like Mino fused with a living kaiju? Well, actually this has already happened. Kaiju number 10 accepts being transformed into a numbered weapon in exchange for information, and becomes the first conscious numbered weapon, being used by Vice Captain Hashina. The big problem is that Hashina is already naturally strong, which causes a kind of incompatibility between him and the kaiju, and their consciousness diverges, since sometimes Hashina wants to do one thing and the kaiju wants to do another, and this makes this weapon extremely problematic, since despite being very powerful, the lack of synchronization limits much of its effectiveness. Kafka does not have this type of problem, as the kaiju side prevails over the human side. The Monio, if Kafka's kaiju side is what prevails and controls everything, doesn't Kafka run the risk of the mosquito kaiju taking over completely? The answer is yes, since this has already happened. As I mentioned, in the fight against Isao Shinomiya, the kaiju completely controlled Kafka's body, and if you find the name Shinomiya familiar, it's because he is Kakoru's father. But the Monio, and about Kafka being the only one who can hear the kaiju mosquito in the first episode, what's the explanation for that? Well, this has not yet been revealed in the manga, so there is no official explanation in the manga as of the date this video was made, but one hypothesis that I consider quite likely is that the kaiju mosquito may have possessed one of Kafka's ancestors, since Kafka has a vision of a samurai when he goes to the temple to train with Hashina, and it is said that users of numbered weapons can access memories of previous users. In addition, it is possible for the user of a numbered weapon to see and even feel the presence of the identified kaiju while wearing the costume. So the samurai that Kafka saw in the temple is probably the previous user of Kaiju number 8, and he could be an ancestor of Kafka, since kaijus have existed for a long time, since the Muromachi era in Japan, which began in the year 1336, which was when Hashina's family began specializing in exterminating kaiju. If the samurai in the vision really is an ancestor of Kafka, this would very well explain the genetic compatibility that Kafka has with the mosquito kaiju, as he may have inherited the genes of his ancestor, who was part kaiju, and would also explain the fact of Kafka already having a natural connection with the kaiju mosquito in the first episode. Remembering once again that Kafka being an ancestor of the samurai is just a hypothesis, and that there is no official explanation in the manga so far, but as I said, it would make a lot of sense. But what about you? Are you following the manga? Did you already know why Kafka was chosen to be Kaiju number 8? Leave it in the comments, and if you liked the video, subscribe to follow the next content. Until next time my people, demonic hugs.